Now, while we here at Radio Free UK are no fans of the BBC, while they do have their monopoly, there's some content which you just can't get anywhere else. And here we include an item from BBC Radio 4, Hard Talk, an interview with a Turkish author, which I found very interesting, so I've included in this week's show.
You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Stephen Sacker. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today has grown used to watching her words with great care. As a writer and journalist in Turkey, Ece Temelkuran has had no other choice for much of her career. She's one of the most prominent voices in Turkey's increasingly beleaguered, secular, liberal community. In her books and her newspaper columns, she's spoken out against human rights abuses, challenged Turkey's official stance on the history of the Armenian genocide, and highlighted abuses committed against Kurdish Turks in the name of national security. In 2012, she was fired from the Haberturk newspaper after writing a column critical of then Prime Minister Erdogan. In many ways, it was a harbinger of things to come. Mr. Erdogan is now president, of course, and in the midst of a massive crackdown on perceived enemies and traitors in the wake of a failed military coup 2 months ago. Turkey is a country racked by deep division and grappling with extraordinary regional pressures and tensions. In that context, what hope is there for freedom and democracy? Well, Ece Temelkuran joins me now. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with what is happening in Turkey today and been happening for the last couple of months. Has it all, everything that's happened since that attempted coup, has it taken you by surprise or not?
The coup, it did. The things that happened afterwards, well, not really. Because everybody has been talking about if this is a staged act or not, if this was a real coup attempt.
And your view on that?
I think it was a real coup attempt. And, in Middle East, the things don't go the way we think they go. The one who benefits from the incident is the one who creates the incident. That rule doesn't really apply every time in Middle Eastern countries. So people thought that since Mr. President is benefiting from the situation, he might have, staged this act, which wasn't the case, I think. Because his political career has been built on this, turning crises into opportunities since from the very beginning. So it wasn't surprising that he would try to strengthen himself even more after the coup, and which was completely legitimate in many people's eyes at the moment.
You mean legitimate for him to crack down as a result of the coup?
Yeah.
And when you use that interesting phrase, turning a crisis into an opportunity,
he's I'm sorry to interrupt, but his political...
Don't worry, I do it all the time. You're allowed.
I'm just trying to set some rules here, so maybe you don't, in the hope that you don't do it. His political career started this reciting a certain poem, and then he was in prison, and when he was out of the prison, he was this very strong leader already. And since from that time going on, throughout his career, he did the similar thing. He turned crises into opportunities, which is brilliant.
You've made a point several times of repeating that poem. It was, I think, in 1997, after a very complex sort of moment in Turkish political history, another sort of attempted coup of a sort. And Erdogan was under enormous pressure, and he addressed a crowd. And this is what he said in his poem at the time. The minarets are bayonets, the domes are helmets, the mosques are barracks, the believers, infantrymen, the divine army awaits my faith, Allahu Akbar. Because you regard that as such a seminal moment, is it true, therefore, to say that you believe that Erdogan's career has all been of a piece, that from the very beginning he has been a man on a mission, and a mission which involves authoritarianism in the name of Islam?
Well, I have been a critic of this government since from the very beginning. I am not one of those who loved this government in the beginning and then all of a sudden understood that there were authoritarian inclinations in this regime. So I would say that, yes, it was completely significant. It was obvious. It was apparent from the very beginning. And when you know Turkish history, it was supposed to be so. This this government was supposed to be authoritarian. I mean, like, we have to go back to 1980 coup, which vanished all the leftist movement, all the progressive people, created millions of exiles, and imprisonments, torture cases, and so on and so forth. And you were left with a very strong conservative society, very much conservative society, and a very strong right-wing politics. So I would say that, it's when you look throughout the time, this government was outcome, or this Turkey, let's say, has been the outcome of 1980 coup.
There are different brands of authoritarianism in Turkey's history, obviously. I mean, there's a strong strand of...
every brand.
Yeah, many brands. But here's just a few figures plucked out of the air from the last couple of months. 130 media organisations shut down since the coup. 45 newspapers, 29 publishing houses, 23 radio stations, 16 television stations, 15 magazines, 3 news agencies, all have in one way or another been intervened with, or shut down by the Turkish government. Some are saying, the liberal secular side of Turkish politics are saying, this is worse, this repression is worse than we saw with the military dictatorships. Do you say that?
Well, I mean, like, it is tragic that we are with these two options only, either military dictatorship or this kind of oppression. So, well, I don't want to make a comparison.
Why not?
Because it's not the only option. These are not the only options.
No, but there are two strands of your history, and it therefore is quite easy to make a comparison. I just wonder if you don't want to, because you're
it's not.
frightened.
Well, I'm like, there are many dichotomies that has been repeated by mainstream media about Turkey, and one of them has been either military people or conservative, right-wing, religious, authoritarian regime. That is not a right way of looking at things, because it assumes that military is the secular body entity, therefore it's against the religious movement. It's not like that. In 1980 coup, after 1980 coup, it was the first time that military approved the obligatory religious lessons in Turkey. And actually, the military authority approved and supported actively the religious movements and, Fethullah Gülen movement, which is the alleged entity responsible for this, allegedly responsible for this latest coup attempt.
Well, I understand what you're saying. You're making a plea for more sophisticated analysis and nuance in the way one looks at Turkey. Yeah, no problem. But what I'm saying to you is, right now, Turks are being encouraged by the government to make a binary choice. I mean, Erdogan is essentially using the language, remember it, of George W. Bush after 9/11. You're either with us or against us. He's saying that he represents the state, democracy, and the survival of a great Turkey. And he's saying that those who are against him are enemies of the state and they are traitors. Which side are you on?
I'm trying to be the storyteller and trying not to take the side and tell the whole story, the entire story. Because once you take the side, you don't hear the other side, and more importantly, the other side does not hear you. And
but there's no room. There's no room, with all due respect.
Absolutely.
In Erdogan's
I was just going to say that
there's no room for that.
It's an extremely polarized society. And you know what I think? I think, we have been hating each other in Turkey. All these polars have been hating each other. And now that hate turned to almost disgust. People don't want to even see the other. They don't want to cohabit with the other, which is a very, very dangerous thing.
See, you rather neatly dodged my whose side are you on question, but I'm going to come back to it, because you have a history with Erdogan. I mean, back in 2012, you were a very prominent columnist with the Haberturk newspaper. You wrote a couple of particularly sort of vitriolic columns taking on Erdogan very directly. I'm just going to quote a little bit of one of them, where you address him directly. And you say, so, you give the orders, my commander, but I am not listening to you anymore. We are the rest of this country. We are not going to listen to your orders anymore. You see, in Erdogan's mind, that probably sounds like, in a sense, you're preempting the coup. You're questioning his very legitimacy.
My God, you're putting ideas in people's minds. No, not at all. It was years ago, one thing, and the second thing, it was not about Erdogan, it was about Robowski massacre, which happened on Iraqi-Turkish border, accidentally killed a dozen of kids on the border.
But you're basically saying,
I was, by the way,
we are the rest of this country.
Fired because of that article, with a 30-second telephone call.
You were fired, I know. You were chucked out.
Yeah.
I know. So I'm saying is, you've tried to navigate, you've tried to continue writing, and you do continue writing, and you have a prominent voice in and out of Turkey, but it is extraordinarily difficult to navigate right now.
Absolutely. One thing I feel like pointing out something. This is the new fashion in media now, being against Erdogan. And it started after Gezi uprising. Before Gezi uprising, all these people who's now criticizing Erdogan, all the intellectuals, most of the intellectuals, most of the journalists, they were praising this Turkish model. Whereas after Gezi happened, it's now all over the place. The dictator Erdogan, they're saying, they're acting as if he's the mother of all evil.
Yeah, suddenly he moved from being the Democrat, the moderate Islamist, to the authoritarian.
You'd be surprised, but I think it's unfair to him because there was something wrong with the model. It's not the man, it's the model, and nobody still takes the time to think about that model, what was wrong about that model.
So you're saying it was absolutely naive and wrong to ever think there was this thing called moderate Islam. Is that what you're saying?
It's not that what I'm saying. It is, this fantasy of, perfect marriage between democracy and moderate Islam was pretty lacking vision.
I suppose, in a sense, I want to get personal. We've talked about the difficulty of navigating as a writer and a journalist in today's post-coup Turkey, and goodness knows it's difficult. Have you had to dial back on what you write? Are you constantly aware with every word that leaves your computer that you could be running a very personal risk?
This has been my story for the last 20 years, which has my entire writing life.
Sure, but there are hundreds of journalists locked up right now, many of them dear friends and colleagues of yours.
Yeah.
That surely means that you can't say what you want to say anymore.
Well, this is not new for Turkey to start with, but it is true that it is becoming more, worrying at the moment. So, yes, I do feel concerned, to give the British understatement.
You are still based in Istanbul?
Yes, I am. I have another place in Zagreb. Now and then I go there, but I bought it a few years ago just to concentrate, because it's not only the oppression, it's not only the, Turkey being threatening or what. The turbulent times, paralyzes you. So you are intellectually paralyzed in such a turbulent country. So sometimes I need some peace of mind, so I go to Zagreb to write.
You've written
novels, actually.
Sure. You've written quite movingly about sometimes the way you feel about Turkey, your homeland. I think there's one phrase I remember about you feeling almost like a relationship with a lover that has hurt you so badly and so deeply. And I just wonder if you believe that the relationship between you and your homeland, if that amount of hurt is there, can be repaired.
This has been going on since the establishment of this country. The state, not the country, but the state has never been compassionate towards people like me, towards people who told the real and entire story of the country. And I mentioned almost all of them in the book, the very important ones at least. Nazım Hikmet, the greatest poet of Turkish literature, Can Yücel, another great poet of Turkish language, and Sabahattin Ali, and all these names either have been imprisoned, tortured, exiled, whatever you want. So this state has been quite merciless against those children of his that loved him most.
Is that because you are out of tune and out of step with most Turks? And therefore it's quite easy to isolate you and to try to pin you down and, in a sense, to silence you?
No country loves their children if that children is constantly talking about the negativities of the country. So it is not about Turkey. It goes for many countries, for many societies, I think. I'm a writer. It's not easy to like a writer who writes about political stuff.
No, and you take on the subjects which Turkey, as a state, not just any colour of government, but as a state has declared to be off limits. For example, the Armenian genocide. You've taken it on in a way that most Turkish journalists and writers refuse to, because they know that it could very well lead to them being locked up. You've also taken on the human rights situation in the Kurdish areas of Turkey repeatedly. Yeah. You are, I think you would probably call yourself a feminist in a way that upsets some Turks.
Yeah.
Certainly a human rights defender.
Absolutely. So I'm not really defender. I'm trying to move to the storytelling part. I am trying to be more on the storytelling part. In all these cases you mentioned, Armenian issue, Kurdish question, and so on and so forth, all of them I wrote to tell the entire story. In Armenian case, for instance, I thought the term genocide stop the conversation in between Turkish and Armenian people. So I tried to find another way to tell the story without mentioning that word, and to tell the pain of Armenian people to Turkish people, and vice versa. For Kurdish people, I try to bring those people as human beings for the people in the Western Turkey to see the story. Because I am this naive person who thinks that, once you know the story, you cannot hate a person.
But against that, you also portray a Turkish society which in some ways seems to be determined, not just because of government instruction, but just collectively determined to forget, to be silent. And you use this phrase about the Dubai-ization of Turkey, where you sort of imply that as long as people have access to shopping malls and access to comforts, they can sort of forget all of the polarizations and divisions within their country. Is that the way you feel about Turkey today?
Turkey is this, the cliche definition, geographical definition is that Turkey is a bridge between Asia and Europe. So once you're on a bridge, you feel like passing through it, not really staying on it. So I always thought that Turkey has been hurrying up, rushing the history, let's say, to cross the bridge. And, the ideology of the established in the beginning was to cross the bridge to the western side, whereas in this new Turkey, the idea was cross the bridge to the other side, to the eastern side.
You strike me as a deeply westernized Turk. Is that the way you see yourself?
Well, I am pretty much Middle Eastern in my emotional world, but then, if you talk about realities, I'm kind of Western, I think.
Well, I want to bring it back to politics now. You'll be delighted to know. I want to bring it back to Mr. Erdogan and your critique of him and of his authoritarianism, which you would, I think, suggest makes his talk of democracy illegitimate. And yet, the truth is that according to all of the polling evidence in Turkey today, he is more popular and the AKP government is more popular today than it's ever been. More than 2/3 of Turks appear to willingly, voluntarily support President Erdogan. How does that fit in your picture?
First of all, like I told it before and I'm repeating it again, this book is not about Mr. Erdogan, and I am not criticizing personally Mr. Erdogan. I'm talking about the system, I'm talking about the ideas, the ideologies, and so on and so forth. That's that aside. Well, democracy is a funny thing. Once you define it as the ballot boxes, then you can get anything you want. But then it's not only ballot boxes; it's unions, it's foundations, it's civil society, and so on and so forth.
Would you draw a parallel between Mr. Erdogan today and Vladimir Putin in Russia? I mean, is that the sort of...
Well, I think there's a trend in the world, and you are going to go through that as well, I think, in Britain. There's a trend of orderism, Putin, Erdogan, Trump. You're having a Brexit here now in France. They're having right-wing parties rising in Austria as well. So this is a trend. And I think it represents the crisis of democracy for the entire world. And that's why Turkey is important, actually. And that's why Europe has to pay more attention to Turkey. Because if Turkish democracy gets damaged, I think that might have a domino effect in Europe. And you're going to see that the right-wing parties in Europe will rise with the same discourse, with the same arguments that has been used in Turkey.
You seem quite disillusioned with the way Europe and maybe the United States, the Western powers, have looked at Turkey in recent years. You seem to believe they've consistently misunderstood what is happening in your country.
Not really. I think they chose to believe in this project of Turkish model because it fit the requirements of the world. Turkish model?
Well, did you mean by that the moderate Islamism? The idea that Erdogan could be that effective bridge between Western democracy and the Arab world and could present, in a sense, a model of democratization.
After 9/11, especially the fears of 9/11 was soothed with this project, which didn't really happen. which didn't really work out. So, by the way, I'm feeling like the guinea pig of a failed experiment, a massive scale experiment. And most people in Middle East think the same way, feel the same way. I'm like, in Egypt, people who went to Tahrir would, kind of think almost the same things like with me on this subject, I guess.
What, a sense of betrayal?
Not betrayal. Like, you were asking about West and my disillusionments. I think they refuse to talk to secular part of the society, secular part of the politics. And they were so enthusiastic for a decade. They were so enthusiastic about this project. So they fell for the narrative of, the seculars of these countries are elites and they are oppressive and they are, oppressing the real people of Turkey or real people of the country and so on and so forth. I think, all these people, all these intellectuals, journalists, writers, they should show the same enthusiasm now when they're communicating with the secular part of the society.
With you mean? Yeah. So what happens to you now? You say from time to time you feel intellectually and sort of creatively paralysed in Turkey and you have to get out. Do you think you will end up living out of Turkey, given the situation today?
No, God forbid. No, I don't want that.
Well, then you might end up locked up.
Well, why are you keep saying that? It's not an
because
easy
I look
thing
at what has
to
happened to
talk
so
about.
many other journalists and writers and, frankly, courageous people, as you've said, who are committed to truth-telling. And right now, in Turkey, that's a dangerous exercise.
I'm not a courageous person. I'm a very good coward, actually. I'm a perfect coward. But the thing is, yeah, I am. You wouldn't
things
believe
you've
it.
written.
Oh my God, I'm a serious coward, actually.
Usually this program doesn't work like this. You tell me you're very brave and I suggest you're a coward. Why are you telling me you're a coward?
No, the thing is, I'm writing that I'm fearing things when I'm writing. That's why I'm writing, most probably. This is the way I deal with life, in my fears. So I'm not a courageous person, so whenever you bring up imprisonment and so on, I go, On the other hand, I don't want to be defined by courage either, because that's a reducing thing, especially for a writer, and it's too much weight on one's shoulder, and then it reduces you to this person who is courageous. And there is a funny thing about being in opposition, especially in Turkey nowadays. Even though you're oppositional, whenever the political power becomes more primitive, you are becoming more primitive accordingly, and you're turning into this person who says no, which doesn't really require much intellectual capacity.
So do you think
that's why I'm trying to write the whole story. That's why I'm telling that Turkey's story is far bigger than AKP government and current issues at the moment.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So my last question is really this: whether you feel that you are going to move away from the sort of daily diet of commentary and columns and journalism and much more to your fiction, maybe more allegorical stuff, where the tension with the state and with the government is less of a daily pressure.
Yeah, because, journalism or, articles, daily articles they're more mediocre in a way, comparing to literature. And when you write literature, you write these big books. So all these people who want to hate you, they have to take their time and spend energy and they don't do that. So they don't see the politics actually buried in them that I secretly buried in those books.
That's a great way of putting it. Ece Temelkuran, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That was an edition of Hard Talk presented by me, Stephen Sacker. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.